Mary Bradshaw, the Director of Visual Arts for the Yukon Arts Center. Mary is going to chair this morning's panel and will introduce each of our distinguished guests. So Mary, over to you.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out bright and early with us. We're going to keep this pretty informal, just have a chance to chat, and we'll also have a chance for questions too, because I know many of you may want to be able to speak directly to our incredible jurors here. They all had a chance to go see the show yesterday and really dive in and look at all the works. I hope you all have too. If you have not, the gallery will be open at 1 o'clock today, and we're leading artist-led tours of the space both at 1 and 2 o'clock. Yeah, awesome. So we have Michelle Jacques. She is the head of exhibitions and collections and chief curator at the Remy Modern in Saskatchewan.
Mary.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was expecting Mike's.
We have to bellow.
I will do my best. This is not the gallery. I understand.
Yeah.
Michelle is head of exhibitions and collections, chief curator at Remy Modern in Saskatchewan. We have Sarah Milroy, chief curator at McMichael. And Heather Igloliorte, which many of you will know. Heather was here a good chunk of last summer, part of the Arctic Art Summit. Now at UVic in Victoria. And I'm sorry, Heather, I'm gonna scroll up to get your proper
Canada Excellence Research Chair.
You're not allowed to
say that.
Sorry, you didn't hear that.
No.
You didn't hear
No.
that.
Oh,
Not
dear.
Anyway,
Okay, let's just
I'm
start
at
with
the
secret.
I'm at University of Victoria.
Just like the word excellence.
Sorry. Awesome. I thought it might be nice for each of you to start and even just talk a little bit about your practice, just so the folks here get a little bit of a sense of the kind of work that you do. And then I'd love to dive in, because I've got some questions even just about how it was working on the prize and looking through all of these Yukon submissions and so on. But yeah, if we can just start with a little bit about your practice or even, an exhibit that you're working on that you're excited about, if that's easier.
Take it away.
Me? Okay. Ulaka, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Heather Igloliorte. I'm a Inuk on my father's side and a white settler Newfoundlander on my mom's side, and also a northerner. I grew up in Happy Valley Goose Bay, Labrador. My family's from further up the coast and Newfoundland. And I was in Montreal for the last 10 years at Concordia University, where I was the university research chair in circumpolar arts. And that's how I got into working on the Arctic Art Summit with all the amazing people here in the Yukon, as well as the Canadian Heritage and the Canada Council, Inuit Art Foundation, and then a group of Sami and Inuit and First Nations and Métis people from all around the circumpolar world. And so I'm really thrilled to be back, because I feel like I knew all the good restaurants to recommend to everyone. It's like, we're going to go to Bird Toast, and then we're going to stop there. Yeah. So I feel like I'm an old hand, exactly. I know where to buy beads and all the other important things when you're visiting the Yukon. What I'm really thrilled about, really feel honored about being on this panel is that having come from a different part of the North, I know how incredibly important it is that artists that are here have the recognition that is both within the territory and outside of the territory that comes with this award, and seeing everything that happened for the long list, the short list, and the prize winner of the first Yukon Art Prize, just seeing how incredibly everyone has been doing has been really enlivening, so it's exciting, and I just want to thank you for including us in this. It's really wonderful.
Yeah. I very much feel the same. It's fantastic to be here. I'm, as the chief curator at McMichael, we've been principally involved over the last 5 years in trying to advance, sort of accelerate change in our collection and our programming away from our traditional focus on the Group of Seven and Tom Thompson to tell more of a story of all Canadians and all periods of Canadian art, and even both genders There were women artists too, like stop the presses. So we had a lot of work to do, and we do it with great joy and enthusiasm. It's particularly wonderful for me to be here in the Yukon. It's my first visit to the Yukon. The Yukon is not a part of Canada that is well represented at the McMichael, although we did make a landmark acquisition of a major work by Janine Freyna-Jutley called Ache, which came into our collection and promptly went off to the New Museum in New York for a showing, which made us feel very proud and happy. But it's an area that I need to learn more about, and I've always wanted to travel here. So when I was asked to come, I was absolutely thrilled. So again, in terms of my practice and background, I grew up in Vancouver. I worked for many years as an editor of Canadian Art Magazine back in the 80s into the 90s. I then started writing as a journalist, art critic for the Globe and Mail for over a decade. Then I had a few years of doing independent curating in collaboration with the Dulwich Picture Gallery in London in the UK, and did a major exhibition on Emily Carr, David Milne, and also Vanessa Bell, a British modernist, with my colleague Ian Desjardins. Ian then moved to Canada and became director of the McMichael and promptly hired me to become his chief curator. So we've been sort of Ike and Mike for about a decade now. He's about to retire and I'll be taking his position. But my life has really been a mixture of writing and latterly over the last decade of curating. But the kind of root of what I do really is, I think, in language and stories and being interested in people, in artists, their lives, what their deeper motivations are in making work, and communication. Like, how do we make people feel a part of the circle, and how do we get people connected to this incredible material in our culture?
I guess that leaves me.
It does.
I am also thrilled to be here, of course, and over the past 8 years or so, I was on the BMO First Prize jury 3 times, and through that experience, just always had this nagging question in my head, which was like, what the heck is going on in the Yukon? To produce. The question is, what the heck is going on in the Yukon to produce all of these incredible young artists? So I've always wanted to come here. I worked for 8 years at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, which would have been such an easy trip up here. And of course, I never made it. I had to move to the heartland of the country to finally fly back to the west and come to the Yukon. So I'm thrilled to be here and to get a little bit of a sense of the art scene here. What a wonderful weekend the announcement of the prize winner is connected to. But I think I started working at the Art Gallery of Ontario 2 weeks after I graduated from my undergraduate degree. So I have being long connected to public art institutions, and I think my practice is very centered around thinking about who comes to public institutions, who gets to engage with art. I loved the phrase that Dr. Brown used a few times, which was that artists allow us to see the world through different eyes or through somebody else's eyes. And I think that really has been at the root of how I think about curating in a public institution. So that has left me interested in all kinds of art. I'm primarily a curator of contemporary art, but I think ended up in chief curator roles about 10 years ago because of the breadth of my interest. I'm not sure, I think when I started working in this way, people called us dilettantes. Now we're called generalists, and we're actually quite desirable. So my curatorial practice spans contemporary art and Canadian historical art as well.
I can see some folks are struggling to hear at the back. There are seats at the front, so I'd just love to encourage you to come down. We
I was
are
just gonna
we
say the
are
same
doing
thing.
our best to project,
I think
but
it's
I
like the-
really feel like let's just be closer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
There's
like,
a bunch of seats.
There's
left.
lots
Right
of
here in a
seats,
row.
please. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, those
Yep.
are our seats.
There's
Go
our
ahead and sit
exactly.
there.
Get in there.
Take our-
Get
We're
in
not gonna
there.
use
Get in
them.
there.
Yeah,
Get
no,
in.
seats,
Yeah. Go go.
but these seats right in the
There's
front are
they're
also all
cells.
free.
Yeah, they're all
Make
free.
it like a kitchen table.
Exactly.
Kitchen table
Yeah. Yay. Okay, great. Again, we're
Perfect.
perfect. Awesome. I just really want to echo how excited we are to have you all here. Honestly, we made like our big wish list, and it was the three of you on the top of it. So we are more than thrilled to have you here. And I think it's so incredible for Yukon artists to be able to interact with you all, and this really isn't an opportunity that comes easily for us where we're located in the
Well, I think-
country. So
You know, I think what Michelle is saying is though this kind of feeling of, what the hell's going on up there?
Yeah.
Like people, like it's really, it makes me think about, other places in Canada that are like maybe far from the center, if we can even think in those terms anymore, like London, Ontario in the 60s, or Halifax in the 70s and 80s that were remote from leading art centers, but there was something about the cross-pollination of people coming in from outside with a place that has a very strong regional sense of its own cultural identity. Those two things sort of coming across each other and creating this sort of explosion of, and then always in these cases, like a few key individuals that just kind of empower the whole thing, And I think that what we see here is that kind of a situation
Alchemy.
again, another kind of alchemical, like a kind of catalytic effect, because I think it is. I think the prize. I'm just looking at Julie here, but I think the prize has had a big role in making people be alert to the Yukon in a way that maybe was like it was out there, but it wasn't. It hadn't been kind of named as a phenom. But I think with the prize, it's kind of named as a phenom. So, brava. Yeah.
I would love to know, as you were going through the piles of applications for the Yukon Prize, did you feel like you saw kind of some themes emerge? I mean, I think we all have like the curator brain that you can't help but organize things. Yeah.
I can start. I think that if I start from thinking about what people wrote about in terms of how they described their work, there was a sort of overwhelming reference to place and relationship to place, and maybe also a desire to find their role within that place. And sort of that last idea pushes what that struggle with defining place can mean, because it's not just all landscape art, obviously. It seemed to be so much about sort of the person and the community, because there was quite a bit of work that talked about place within the community and relationship to the here. So I found that as I was going through the piles with that idea in the back of my head, I always got this very clear picture of the artist and how they made their work. Whether it was somebody out exploring the landscape or somebody working inside trying to stave off the elements in the middle of
Winter.
winter, making something at the kitchen table.
I would love to know what Jeffrey's studio looks like.
Yes,
Components and parts
yeah.
everywhere.
We're trying to
Like,
stave
kind
off
of a
insanity.
Yeah.
Mad winter Yukoner.
Yeah.
tinkering. I'm just projecting, but I.
Yeah.
That's what it's like. I agree. I think it's like there's clearly a deep connection to the land, but that
Yeah.
comes out of people's art in lots of different ways. And I think we saw that from. We had over 65, I think, odd applications this year. It was really incredible and a very difficult process to go through. But I'm like, I think we did a great job.
Yes.
The short list of artists, but also the long list. As you were reading it, I can't even see the president now, but she was reading out the list of names of the long list. I was like, oh yeah, it's like really awesome. And very, I think, as you can see, as you walk around the exhibition, there's an incredible amount of diversity and distinctiveness in each of the artworks. But we were sort of like, so there's this auditory component, and then there's this other soundscape work over here, which relates to the land, which is also around. Trees and the skinning, and it looks like the textile element, which comes through in the beadwork. You can sort of see how it all kind of relates. I guess that's also to Mary's credit for doing curating the exhibition in such a way that you could kind of move through the space and understand how they're all related to this place, and yet all very different artists.
I'm listening to you talking, and I'm thinking about something that when you look at Jeffrey's audio and film work, and you look at Kaylin's fantastic beadwork, there's also, I think, consistently across a lot of the work we saw this real investment in slow making, like fastidious making, and that takes time, and that investment of time, and it makes me wonder if that isn't part of this place too.
That you have
the space,
the sort of the time and space to work on.
To go deep with the work.
A lot of experimentation too, I think. Like when Rebecca said that to create the trees, you just unzip them. I was like, I would never think that those could be zipped and unzipped. Like that speaks to an incredible virtuosity of being able to work with materials as well that I was deeply impressed by.
Yeah.
No, I really love that idea of slow making. I think you could really apply that across a lot of artists. Like I see Michelle Melvin right here as well. Like that's. But I think exactly that time to give yourself space and really do things like on that meticulous level a lot of times
like
too, right? It's
almost like a kind of meditative or devotional obsession with the material.
If you haven't seen the collection show that opened yesterday as well, like talk about that sort of dedication to really, whether it's like indigenous knowledge passed down through grandmothers that you can really see the sort of time. Oh my God!
Or that tufting berry bag was worth the
beadwork
flight.
by the 14-year-old Cohen.
Yeah,
Cohen.
Just an incredible investment that you can see. A real, I don't want to be hokey, but like a love coming through a lot of this work that you can see that is invested in the making. And so it's been a real joy.
Yeah.
This is just a love-in, actually.
It occurs to me that there's also a thread of storytelling, though, sort of most obvious in Cole's work.
Yeah.
But there are stories at the root of Kaylin's work.
Omar, certainly, for sure.
Yes, and I think that's interesting as well, to think about whether sort of narrative becomes not only a way of exploring the self and the relationship to place, as we've been talking about, but to sort of sharing, getting details out about what it is to be an artist here.
Absolutely.
I wanted to pick your brain on surprises too. As you went through, I actually feel like even the lists that you brought together, the artists that you brought together, in some ways, I think surprised even some Yukoners in really delightful ways. And did you guys find surprises as you were going through the submissions?
Well, because I'm from a small place, and I understand that exhibition venues are few and far to come from. And then also there's an obligation on behalf of the venue to make sure that everyone, that you're not just showing the same people over and over again, but that's spaced out. But then it's like, where are you going if you can't, if you're not known outside of the territory? Like that's a problem in Labrador and Newfoundland, the whole East Coast to a certain degree, and throughout the North. And so I think, like, I'm thinking about Elena's, the video, the fabulous videos in the exhibition. If you haven't had a chance to listen to those, they really reveal what the artist is thinking through in their work. And Elena was saying, I haven't really even shown these pieces recently. So it's a real honor for me to be in this mix with such an incredible group of artists, because it's sort of inspiring me to relive my practice. And I thought that was really exciting. Her discussing her works being like pixels and thinking about beadwork in that frame is like, it's a different way than I think about beadwork, and so I was really excited to see that for sure.
I think a thing that surprised me, and this is just indication of how little I know about how the community has been built here, was how many people, not particularly on the short list, but in all of the applications, had sort of sought out coming here.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the same thing.
As a way to push their practices forward, to find a place where they could kind of infuse their experience of making with what it was that had been missing in other places.
There's kind of a cosmopolitanism, as well as a strong sense of like local identity and on the ground identity, but it's against that like cross threading of people coming from somewhere else and then intersecting with something really rooted and grounded here. Yeah.
As somebody who has been from away in Halifax, Victoria, and now Saskatoon, I've been asking a lot of questions since getting here about how fast the integration is for people who come away, and it feels like it's a place where community happens in kind of a combustive way.
There's a lot of culture here, and I know we were here at an art crawl, and so it seems like, oh my god, the city is alive with that. But it is, there is a lot that's happening here, and like even just the depth and breadth of your food choices. There's way better food here than should be for a town of 40,000 people. And I'm like, is the tourism industry still seeing all this? It's just like is it a bunch of like wayward chefs who've decided to like make their home in Whitehorse? I don't know what it is, but you're very fortunate, I would say. And just the spaces that sort of open their doors for cultural activities, I think is also, Whitehorse seems to be punching above its weight class, certainly in the cultural area.
But that sense of people choosing it, and again, it reminds me of Halifax in that regard. There's the people that are there, and then there's the people who have made a deliberate choice that they want a different kind of life, and they want to go there to find it. And they bring a kind of intentionality to their sort of citizenship, that is their engagement, right? That's maybe heightened a bit. Maybe that's part of the energy that you feel here. It's people having chosen it, and
Awesome. I want to leave space for questions, so I'm just gonna kind of finish up on the formal side. I would love for you guys, this is incredibly practical, but just like tips, hints for future folks applying to the prize. I know, sorry.
Maybe the thing to do is to circle back to the title of the panel, which is what do you look for?
Yeah.
In contemporary art. We haven't really talked about that, and it just seems to me that that's the same question.
Yes.
And thinking about that on the way, knowing that I'm coming here, I thought about, when have been the moments when I've walked into a gallery or something and seen a work and known this person is going somewhere with this work. What is that moment about when you recognize that? And I think the moment I thought about then was walking into Yukon in Montreal and seeing the first time I saw a painting by Joseph Tisiga, who's of course in our thoughts because he's the first winner of this prize. And it was a painting called Red Chief, and it had one of his top-hatted figures sort of engaging with another sort of vaporous, almost ghostly character that had a sort of a mask-like face with feathers around it. And it had that very distinctive Tisiga sense of both like humor and menace at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you know, the way he makes images, his watercolor technique, but also his sort of expressive range is you could never mistake him for someone else's work, you know? And I think in my thinking, it's like he's a perfect test case. If you feel, you know, you have this sense that this person is the lock between what they're trying to say and how they are saying it are inextricably connected to each other. And also that this is something that they have to say. In other words, that the work is driven by a sense of compulsion. And I feel in Tisiga's work, one of the things we see there is this fundamental confusion about settler and indigenous. You can never quite figure what the hell is going on in these pictures, you know?
Yeah.
And that ambiguity, I think, comes right out of Joseph's own blended bloodlines that he's trying to work out, you know? And so he's scratching an itch that is very deep in him. And I think when you see artists that are doing that, it's you can't mistake, you can't miss it when it's there. And
When someone is like, they've been driven a little bit mad,
Yeah.
just a little bit
Yeah.
mad by their work, and it's like, you know,
Yeah.
they're getting up at 3:00 in the morning, like, I gotta get back to the
Yes,
studio,
yeah.
and like, you know,
Yeah.
that there's something that they're working
It's
through,
compulsive.
it comes through,
Yeah.
and I think that's, you can tell when someone has a lot of focus on their work, and they're trying to work through something. And
it's
I
like they
think
need to
definitely-
make it, not that they decided to make it, or they,
Right.
Yeah.
you know, that they need to make it in order to deal with something in them.
Yeah.
And that's something that, it's not necessarily something that I guess I look for it, but it's rather to say it's something I recognize when I see it.
Something you can see.
And it's really
Yeah.
striking. Like I remember the first time I saw an installation, again, I'm so old now, but you know, saw the first installation I ever saw of Brian Youngin was one of the giant whales made of
Yeah.
plastic lawn chairs. It was in some alternative space in the East End of Vancouver.
Just kind of takes your breath away.
And I
Right.
walked in there just like, this is a complete vision of the contemporary world
Yeah.
through this indigenous lens and also deep historical lens of the natural world and where Brian's people come from and all of that. And it just knocks you out. So I guess that's something I look for. Yeah.
I thought about the question from a slightly different perspective. I was thinking really practically. And a tip that I always give to artists is that they should grab me with their ideas. And Joseph and Brian are good examples
Yeah.
of people who have figured out a visual language that manifests their ideas in
Exactly.
such a incredible way. But when I say I'm thinking more practically, what I'm thinking about is like the communication between artist and curator, and the communications that you get where the person says, I'd like a show. And there's no information about like what the show is about. And if somebody has a conversation with me and like really grabs me with the ideas that they're pursuing in their work, then they just stick in my head.
Yeah.
And like the show might not happen next month or next year. There was an artist that I worked with in Victoria. I had first done a studio visit with her in 1999, and we did the show in 2015. And just the like perfect context for her work came up. But not only do the ideas stick in your head and you know, the right time might emerge for the idea to grow into an exhibition, but curators are talking to each other all of the time about artists that we've seen, and we can't each cover this vast country and know everything that's going on. But if I've had a really good conversation with somebody about the ideas they're pursuing in their work, and somebody comes to me and says, I'm doing an exhibition about artists who work with food, then like all of that is rolling around up there, and
Truly.
kind of gets shared in interesting ways and can really lead to interesting things.
And it's
the big
always like the
bingo
meal
ball.
at the end of the
Mhm.
symposium,
Yes,
and then
yes.
you're like, oh, I was at this amazing thing. You would love this person, and we just kind of help to circulate names and artists that way. And on that note, an even more practical tip for artists is, I don't know what I'm looking for in your art if I can't find you online. And so I'm actually very grateful to the Yukon Art Collection, because they have a profile of, practically every artist has something online that you can go and see a couple of works of theirs, and that was helpful in our research, right?
Yeah.
Like looking
Yeah.
up the context for some people's work, but some people have very extensive websites and others do not, and I won't name any names in the room, but there are some people that could be that we wanted to find more and more and see more of the work, because we want to see what your trajectory is. And so I think for anyone who's a professional artist, people need to be able to find you. That's just like we use the internet as a tool now. I'm always pulling out my phone and
Yeah.
saying, oh, did you see this new mural work by this artist? Like, you should check it out. And so I think that's a very practical tip, is like, start a little website, like make yourself Googleable. And I always think about this wonderful Inuit artist, Alberta Rose. And I was saying to her, if you Google Alberta Rose, you will just find Alberta roses.
Right, yes.
And I was like, you need to get a website that says Alberta Rose Inuit artist or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Like, you need a platform that makes you also searchable.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the other.
that's true. And then
the other
also,
thing for sure.
I'd say, this is speaking as a former journalist and sometime translator of art speak, is that for God's sake, talk to me.
Yeah.
Don't feel that in order for your work to be taken seriously, it has to be written about in a way where you're not even actually sure-footed in, because it's not your natural language of speech. Just be yourself, because ultimately the whole gig is about being yourself.
Yeah.
Like, the work you make is about being yourself and no one else. The writing you do is about your voice.
Yeah.
Don't try to mimic some other way of communicating that is not, generic to, not deeply embedded in who you are.
When I was in art school, I had a prof that would say, copy yourself, plagiarize your own work until you finally figure out who it is that you are. What is the most you in all of your work that you're doing, and just keep working towards that, which I thought was.
I'm really fascinated with all the different ways now that we write about art, and we've just finished doing a big book called Early Days, Indigenous Art at the McMichael. It's going to be coming out in November, and one essay is written by a woman who's a goose hunter, responding to Violet Chum, who's responding to some carving, some decoys, and other works are very academic, and other works are written by family members, and other elements of this book are Q&A. But it's to try and break down this, what is the authoritative voice now? Can we please drop the footnotes in certain contexts? They very much belong in many contexts, academically, of course, but in terms of communicating with the general public, it's like wrapping a text in barbed wire.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and how can we feel you? So that would be my advice too. Because I think there's more appetite. I think there's more respect for plain spokenness now than there was 30 years ago when I started my career.
Yeah.
It was, a real struggle at Canadian art in the early years to get people to just speak plainly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Almost-
if you're not a great writer, I also
Yeah.
get a vibe there's a lot of great writers in the Yukon. So
Yes.
find a writer to work with you and read your, an artist statement and something that just says these are the things that I care about, and that's what I'm working through. And then also when you're talking about individual works, like you said, for it to be really clear that what it is that you are, what's your concern in making this work? What are you thinking through? Whether it's just I love this place.
Yeah.
Or this is something that's frustrating me, or I'm concerned about this major thing. It could be big or small, but just make sure that you're conveying it clearly.
And I guess I also feel, but maybe it just reflects my own interest in art and artists, is that how is this practice of yours rooted in your lived experience in the world? Why are you making this work? What is the root of it? I know that Jeffrey, that Bill Burns is a colleague of yours, and you've worked together, a wonderful artist who makes these extraordinary environmental works, which are the series called Safety Gear for Small Animals, arguably the most eccentric art project in the history of Canadian art, making these tiny little, dust masks for mice and stuff like that. But then I he's been doing it for 30 years, so talk about compulsion. It's true madness and genius. But, I found out when I was a journalist, I would always ask questions about people's lives. And I found out that I don't think he'd mind me saying this because it was published, but that he had a sister who was brought up, the family lived under quite straitened financial circumstances. And a lot of energy in the family was around a sister of his who was very seriously ill all the way through her childhood. And she basically lived in an oxygen tent in the middle of the family. So, when I found that out, it was like the kind of, there it is, like care, being responsible and protective of things you care about. That life is delicate and fragile, like this cherishing quality that is so distinctive in Bill's work. Like that's it. That's the shiatsu point right there.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like with Cole Paul's graphic novels and the stories about going to art school. Like one of the things we were saying, it's like that should be distributed to every first-year Indigenous student before they go to start a BFA program. Like it's just such a powerful example of like how you can speak truth to power in situations where you feel uncomfortable. And so I'm just like, there's some really beautiful messaging that's coming through all of the works in the show. I think Elena's even in Elena's video where she says, she's like, I'm drawing these images from the internet. I'm sourcing found imagery from online shopping. I think a lot of Yukoners can relate to that.
Yeah.
Somebody grew up on a Sears catalog. I was like, I deeply do relate.
Yeah. It becomes, so often it's like, what is the grain of sand? That's what's helpful to people when you're communicating about art, I think, is like, what's the grain of sand that the pearl of the work is building around? And is that grain, like, is that sand, if there are 12 different grains of sand, in which case you're probably not going to, there has to be a central concern, I feel. And with artists who have really distinguished careers, you often can identify what that is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so don't be afraid to include yourself in the story of yourself.
We haven't left any space for questions to anybody else. Speaking of our leaving room.
So yes, if anyone would, if there are questions from the audience, we'd love to.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how we can make that art more approachable, because what happens, like I'm on the prize committee and I'm working for the arts in Yukon, but what I run into is a lot of this art, as a public, as a non-artist, I look at some of the work and I go, oh, what the heck is that? And why is it here? And boy, last year I was overwhelmed, last show by Veronica Berkeley's horse. Oh my God. But what do you do with that? You can't have that in your living room. How do we make art approachable to the regular person so that they're not turned off when they see something? They go, oh my God, what the heck? And they go, I couldn't put that in my house, because they're not seeing those stories that you're talking about. I guess I'm talking about private versus institutional art. Take this question where you will. But how do I communicate it so more people can understand and appreciate art, let alone buy art so that artists can make a living?
Well, I don't think any artist makes, say, like 6,000 pound, like massive sculpture, and it's like, this is going to someone's living room. I think those are like, they're anticipating that they're going to go.
That was institutional.
I know, but I do understand what you're saying, and I think that, it's like, when children encounter a work like that, they don't think about like, well, this is impractical. Where will this go? And I think that there's that kind of wonder and curiosity and engagement that we kind of lose at some point, or that institutions stop, like our educational institutions stop trying to encourage us to go into. And so I think it starts a lot younger than, it's hard as an adult if you have not been encountering art in this kind of way to then suddenly come in and see something that's not, a Tom Thompson landscape painting.
Exactly.
And, the median age of people who visit art galleries and museums is about 12 years old, because it's a lot of school groups that come through. And so
great.
the work is like interpreted in a contemporary art way, but that's again why it should be done in a way that you can understand what it's
Yeah.
about, because you want school-age children to be able to also understand what the art's about.
Yeah, but I think what we're up against in the art world too is that for some reason, like, people don't expect to immediately understand contemporary theater or contemporary music, you know, or contemporary brain science or contemporary whatever it is.
Why are we afraid of art?
But why
you
do
know?
we expect to understand art? And then if we don't understand art, we immediately feel like, you know, inflamed and angry or fearful of being perceived as stupid. Like, what is it about visual art that scares people so much? And I think that, you know, what I'm just really aware of in the museum context is the glory of, and unlike my newspaper days when I was writing to a grimy little black and white picture, to be able to write, I mean, I'd still write all my own extended labels, because that is the magic, when you can actually be on someone's shoulder and create a space where the viewer can like actually feel safe and supported in their curiosity, and not, you know, not feeling like threatened by their own unknowing, but rather enticed by their own unknowing. And that's what I think museums have to really work to try to create that space of like, it's okay that I don't know this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I am welcome here, you know, whereas if you hit a wall text that's completely incomprehensible, it's just there it goes, like, boom, you lost them.
Sometimes museums have like the wall text and then they have the children's text, and the
Yeah.
children's one is usually better.
Better,
Like,
yeah.
oh, now I know what this is about. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
okay, I get it
and
now.
I will say, like, even as a
Yeah.
curator and an art historian with 20
Yeah.
years experience, I don't like instantly get every work of art that I look at. But
No.
I think it's approaching it with that, like, what is this about? Instead of
Yeah.
like, I don't know what that's about. And I think that is
And
one of
maybe
the
museums
one of the
are
starting
about
points.
having to train people. I mean, this goes to the kind of ethic of the museum, but maybe it's about being a space where people can be trained in being comfortable not knowing the answer. Because that, you know, that kind of lies at the root of, you know, basically civil society, is that I don't understand this. I'm going to shut it down, but I'm going to lean in and ask questions, you know, and that's very, very important if you're going to have a society that has any measure of equity in it, you know.
I think the way the question was asked too, like, really gets at the heart of the conundrum of visual art, because you said you saw a work that made you go,
Mhm.
like, it got you right here, but then
Mhm.
your mind immediately went to, how is the artist going to sell that? How are they
Mhm.
making a living? So it's like that kind of tension between art
Striking you. Yeah.
and the art market. And a couple of days ago, I was a guest speaker at in a feminist art class that is taught online out of UVic, and it was fascinating because the instructor let the students know that the class was going to be taught in a way that brought the back to the front. And what was meant by that, you know, he said, in most classes you spend the whole semester learning analysis, and then presumably at the end of learning all of that analysis, you're supposed to know how to interact with the work of art. You're supposed to know how to respond to it. And in this class, we're going to look at art, and we're going to sit in the emotion of your immediate response. Like, there were students just completely flabbergasted by this, and we're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this.
Right.
You know, after studying art history or visual art for 3 years,
Being told
getting
what to see.
Really
nervous
just-
about having to feel the work. And I can't remember who compared it to music or theater. I think Heather, Sarah, you said that. And it's absolutely true. You know, my mother would take us to see the Toronto Symphony when we were kids, and you'd go and you'd cry because it was so beautiful, and I didn't know what we were listening to, or
But you didn't have to master it, you know?
and it's absolutely true that we've got tens of thousands of kids coming through museums every year, and if we could just like make that the kind of meat of how visual art is received. You know, I see those little kids at Ramey Modern lying on the floor, looking up at the thing hanging on the ceiling and just going, wow. And I want like everybody to come in and go, wow.
Yeah.
We should all lie on the floor.
Yes.
More often in museums.
I would say it's hard to be sort of everything to everyone at once, but you can generate, for institutions in particular, you can generate new audiences by reaching out to particular like having a Caribbean food night, and then, you know what I mean? Or like doing something that's inviting different communities into the gallery. Like I was thinking about at the Winnipeg Art Gallery a few years ago, Jamie Isaac, an Indigenous curator, she organized an exhibition called Border X. And it was all about board culture as it shows up in the visual arts, but they built a skate park in the front atrium of the institution, and kids were like skateboarding into the gallery while security was like, this is okay. And and so then they brought this whole different faction of like young people who were teenagers who would never normally just wander into an art gallery. And then through having them go and see that, they were like, I want to see art by skateboarders, and and then going to see the rest of the exhibition and kind of wondering. And so think about how you get different communities into spaces by trying to tailor it to them, instead of saying like, we have this, come see it, but really being like, hey, I'm reaching out to you. I want you to come in and see this. Food is always like, I've talked about food a lot on this panel already. Yeah. I'm not trying to do a thing. Music is also great. They've been feeding us well, I guess.
Lots of fans.
I had a question for the panel about how do we look as a territory? In term, remember, Michelle, you were saying there was a question of what's going on up there in the, not really knowing about maybe our identity or. Anyway, I'm wondering about how as jurors looking at a group of artists, do you see a large difference between here and Saskatchewan? I'm sure Southern Ontario. No. Did you mentioned some kind of a sense of cultural? You found some themes. I'm just not sure I'm articulating it. How do we do
it? Well, in a ranking of 12 through what? No.
And I should introduce, this is Michelle Melvin. Michelle was on the long list for the prize this year as well.
Congratulations, Michelle.
I'm not sure if this answers the question directly, but it ties back to something that was discussed earlier. Sarah, you were talking about those moments in regional centers where the alchemy was right. And coming from Saskatchewan, they are still really sort of living in a historical moment of the Emma Lake workshops when New York art critics interested in abstract art deemed Saskatchewan the second most important center for abstract art after New York. And Saskatchewan can't let go of that. So what that means is like a wonderful film artist like Emily Atkins, or an incredible ceramic artist like Clint Neufeld is perhaps not getting their due because the painters still rule. And what struck me here is that like this, your moment is contemporary and also defined by diversity of practice, and hang on to that and don't try and sort of narrow it down anymore and say like Yukon art is all about beading or Yukon art is all about landscape painting. If there's a way to like just celebrate that diversity, I think it will allow for the importance of this place to have a very long life.
I would say that we know that all across the north and in every non-major urban southern center, the arts are underfunded, right? You have more challenging to access. It's harder to get materials. It's more expensive to have things shipped here. It's more difficult to access what's happening in institutions across the south, where like in the major cities where art is happening right now. It can be good and bad, right? It can also be good to not be like affected by like, oh, what's popular in Montreal or Toronto right now, or like what's trending. I was at Art Chicago and everybody had glitter in their art, and I was like, when did this become a thing? I was like, lots of glitter art happening right now. I was like, you could skip that trend if you want to. You can get in on it. Like, I think that there is. There's like trends come and go in the art world, and I think that like we've all been saying, like there's something really important about developing your distinct voice and being and like really working through your own kind of a practice. That said, I think the Yukon is very impressive, but I will say that I didn't, even as a northerner from another part, I was not super aware of everything that was happening here before last summer when I was here for the Arctic Arts Summit, and that was mostly exposure to Indigenous artists through like Attica, and I couldn't believe, I was just like, I bought so many earrings, I just like spent all my per diem on beads and hide and fur, and I think that it's prizes like this that really help to draw attention to what's happening here, and like we said, and then people look at your work and maybe they don't have something for you right away, but then they're doing a quilting show and they're like, oh, I saw Julie J's piece last night at this quilting show. Like, sorry, Julie, but it was awesome. I didn't read the label, and somebody said later, that black and white and blue piece was Julie's, and I was like, oh my God, I love that. Yeah, I know, right?
Wow, the one I said was like G's bed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so a little, and then, as curators, we kind of keep a Rolodex in our mind of, I can't believe I just referenced Rolodexes, but like in our mind of like artists and where they sort of, where they might fit together, whose work is complementary with others. And like you said, shows and ideas and things can germinate for a while, and then, it's the greatest joy to help an artist get to a new level in their work, or to see them connect with another artist through a residency where you're like, oh, your work, you would be really interested in what this person's doing. Like, that's the kind of funnest part of the job, really.
But I think what's great about this experience is we're brought in as jurors, but then there's also like this panel, and then the panel that follows this morning. There's robust opportunities for us to talk with the artists after this in social settings. Like, it's not just like there's a prize, they buy a page of the Globe and Mail, no newspaper will write about it because newspapers never write about prizes, and it's over. Like there's really the whole structure of the exchange between us and the community here is really carefully tended to provide opportunities for real contact, which I think is so smart.
Yeah.
You're doing great.
Yeah.
I'm realizing we're actually over
Yeah,
time,
we should,
so we should
wrap it
leave
up.
space for our next panel. But thank you, everyone. Thank you to our jurors.